Shalom, Israel, Most High in Christ. Bless all praises to the Most High in the name of His Son, His Word, Jesus the Christ, for all things, always. I just wanted to cover the day of the destruction of Nicanor and the Feast of Purim, because that's coming up on the 17th through the 20th. It's the day of the destruction of Nicanor and then the days of Purim, but Purim was established first. So I want to go through this history real quick, and so that we know about this right here, because I always cast down these wicked imaginations, right? These pagan holidays, but a lot of people don't know that we have holy days that we have that in our culture that we're supposed to keep, right? So I like to bring those out as well. So this is Esther, the 4th chapter, and I'm gonna jump around in the book of Esther. I'm going to start with verse 7, just to get a little context. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him and the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. You see that right there? So Haman had this plan of wiping out all the Israelites, all the Jews specifically, so-called blacks and West Indians and Haitians, right? Mordecai being of the tribe of Benjamin, so-called West Indian or Jamaican today, and Esther being his cousin, who she had not revealed her race. She was racially ambiguous, but she was very beautiful. The Persian king had married her, so now she's a queen, but she didn't necessarily want to reveal her race to the king. But this is what's happening. Haman's trying to kill off all the Jews. So I'm going to jump down to verse 13. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. He said, look, you're not above your people. You can never rise above your people. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. So Mordecai said, look, I'm not even worried about the Lord saving us. He always does that. I'm worried about you. But if thou and thy father's house But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So, again, Mordecai said, look, I know we're going to be delivered from the Lord. The question is, are you going to be on board? Are you going to be willing to do what it takes? Or are you going to be destroyed? So here's Esther's response. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer, go to gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. And so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Because she's not supposed to be able to go in there and tell the king what to do. Right? That's why she was very fearful. She didn't want to be on board with trying to save her people. Trying to save which Mordecai was trying to get her to do. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So in those 3 days, Esther devised a plan, right? She come up with a plan of action. I'm going to jump to chapter 7. Her plan of action was to have a feast for the king many nights. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther, the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the 2nd day of the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? See, the king, Ahasuerus, he wasn't stupid, right? He knew that, she's doing these banquets for me because she wants something. What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. He said, look, I'd give you half the kingdom. That's how much he loved her. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me, and my petition, and my people, and my request. She's saying, look, somebody's trying to kill me and my people. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. She's like, look, if we were just enslaved, that'd be one thing. But they're trying to kill us. They're trying to exterminate us. Trying to genocide us. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther, the queen, who is he, and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen, right? So Esther was slick because she invited Haman to the banquets as well, just so she could point him out and say, this is the wicked man right here that's trying to kill me and my people. And of course, Haman was very close to the king, like right-hand man or whatever. But obviously in the king, since he loves his wife, he's like, why are you trying to do this to my wife? Verse 7, and the king arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen. He said, look, please have mercy. That's not what he was saying before. He was trying to kill all the Jews before. For he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Right, the king said, I'm going to kill him now. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? Right, so Haman just made it look way worse. Right, so now it looks like he's trying to rape her too, even though he necessarily wasn't trying to do that, but still though, he was wicked as hell. He deserved all this. As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Right, they put the bag on his head. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold, also the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman, right? Because it talks about earlier, I should say. It talks about earlier in the book of Esther how Mordecai had gained favor with the king by stopping an assassination attempt. And then the king said, hang him thereon. So Haman got hanged on his own devices. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. He said, okay, now I can chill. Now I can chill because I killed this wicked man that was trying to kill my wife. All right. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman the Jews' enemy unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her, right? Because he didn't even know the relationship that Mordecai and Esther had as far as like they were cousins. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite. And if you know Agag, you know that he was a king of the Amalekites, right? A sect of Edomites, what we call Jewish people today. Those are the Amalekites, the Agagites. And his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Amadatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews, which are in all the king's provinces, right? Because Haman had written a policy, right, and was going to sign it and get the king to sign it into action to kill all the Jews. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, right? He said, make it official, right? Whatever policy you would have to reverse this decision and make it official. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, and in the 23rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, the deputies, and the rulers of the provinces which are from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language, right? So he made it official in all his different provinces that he owned, all his different states, all the different languages over the people that he ruled. And he wrote it in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, right? Because it wasn't just Haman. Everybody else was on board with it as well. So the king had to reverse that decision and put it in every language and in every province, right? Everybody was out to get us. All right. That would assault them, both little ones and women. See, like they weren't going to spare anybody. And to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is in the month of Dar, right? That's when Purim starts. It's the 13th day of the 12th month. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the post that rode upon the mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. So they wrote the policy, they got into action, they made it official in all the different provinces of the empire. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. Right? Looking royal, looking fancy. And the king and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. See, this is a day of honor, it's a day of joy, it's a day of gladness. And in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandments and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them, right? So there was proselytes and people keeping the law once again, all right? Now, in the 12th month, that is the month of Dar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, and that day that all the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them, that hated them, right? So it's a day of deliverance. It's a day of salvation. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants, the deputies, the officers of the king helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them, right? Because Mordecai was given that power by the king to be the right-hand man of the king, similar to Joseph in ancient Egypt. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. You see that right there? So everything they would have done to us, we ended up doing it to them. And in Shushan, the palace of the Jews, slew and destroyed 500 men. And Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Paratha, Adalia, Aridatha, and Parmashta, Arasai, Aradai, and Bajazatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Ammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they. But on the spoil laid they not their hand. On that day, the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done. He said, hey, is that it? Is there anything else I can do for you? We done killed all these people for you that wanted you killed. All these people that were doing you harm. We done killed them. Anything else I can do? Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons, right? Just to make an example. They were already dead at that point, but they needed to be made an example next to their father. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month of Dar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the prey laid they not their hand, right? They didn't take all their steps, because that's not what it was about. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies. See, that's the point right there. And had rest from their enemies. Most, if not, no, it's not all of them, but most of the high holy days of the Lord is about Israel having rest from our enemies, all right? And slew of their foes 75,000, but laid not their hands on the prey. On the 13th day of the month of Dar, and on the 14th day of the same, rested day and made it a day of feasting and gladness. You see that right there? So 13th day of the 12th month and the 14th day of the 12th month, those are days of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same day rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar, a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another, right? Sending people gifts, sending people food. That's what sending portions is. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly. You see that right there? So that's Purim, the 14th and the 15th day of Adar, of the 12th month. As the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning unto a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Ammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to consume them, and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and he and his son should be hanged upon the gallows. Wherefore they call these days Purim, after the name Pur, which is lots, right? Casting lots. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year. So as we read this, it said the 13th, 14th, and 15th days, right? But the days that were established as Purim specifically were the 14th and 15th day. We're about to get into the 13th day here in a minute, and that would be the day of the destruction of Nicanor, all right? That they would keep these 2 days in their appointed time, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation. You see that right there? So it's not just like an Old Testament thing. It's at every generation, every family, every province, and every city. And that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. You see that right there? So, that is the days of Purim established. I'll go ahead and read these last 4 verses. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm the second letter of Purim, right? So they sent out the first letter to let people know, sent the second letter to confirm it. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus. Right, so there was Jews, even at that time, from India to Ethiopia, right? With words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoyed them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book, right? So they established this feast day for it to be kept forever, right? So that was Purim. That was the 14th and 15th day that was established. But we're about to get into the 13th day now, with the day of the destruction of Nicanor. All right, so this is 2 Maccabees, chapter 15. I'm going to start with 1 and jump around. But Nicanor, hearing that Judas and his company were in the strong places about Samaria, resolved without any danger to set upon them on the Sabbath day. Nevertheless, the Jews that were compelled to go with him said, O destroy not so cruelly and barbarously, but give honor to that day, which he that seeth all things hath honored with holiness above all other days. So even the wicked Jews that were with Nicanor said, don't fight the Jews on the Sabbath day, because that's the Lord's day. Then the most ungracious wretch, meaning Nicanor, demanded if there be a mighty one in heaven that had commanded the Sabbath day to be kept. He said, oh really, you have a God that said this? And when they said, there is in heaven a living Lord and mighty who commanded the 7th day to be kept, they said, yes, that is a commandment from our God. Then said the other, so this is what Nicanor said, listen how wicked he is. And I also am mighty upon earth, and I command to take arms and do things, and to do the king's business. Yet he obtained not to have his wicked will done. Right. So Nicanor said, "Oh, your God is mighty. well, I'm mighty too, and I'm here on earth telling you this, right? So wicked, just evil as hell. So Nicanor, in exceeding pride and haughtiness, determined to set up a public monument of his victory over Judas and them that were with him, right? So wicked. He's trying to make an example out of righteous Israelites, right? So I'm jump down to verse 21. Maccabeus, that is Judas Maccabeus, seeing the coming of the multitude and the diverse preparations of armor and the fierceness of the beast, stretched out his hands toward heaven and called upon the Lord that worketh wonders, knowing that victory cometh not by arms, but even as it seemeth good to him. He giveth it to such as are worthy. Therefore in his prayer he said after this manner, O Lord, thou didst send thine angel in the time of Hezekiah, king of Judea, and it is slain in the host of Sennacherib 185,000, right? 185,000. Wherefore now also, O Lord of heaven, send a good angel before us, for a fear and a dread unto them, right? So he's calling upon history as he's praying to the Lord. That's history, I believe it's in Isaiah 37. Regardless, it's in the book of Isaiah. When, as he said, the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, come against Jerusalem, right? He had already taken the northern kingdom, but he come against the wall of Jerusalem, and Hezekiah prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord sent down an angel and killed 185,000 men in one night. And through the might of thine arm, send a good angel before, so he's calling for an angel as well. And through the might of thine arm, let those be stricken with terror that come against thy holy people to blaspheme. And he ended thus. Then Nicanor and they that were with him came forward with trumpets and songs. But Judas and his company encountered the enemies with invocation and prayer, so that fighting with their hands and praying unto God with their hearts, they slew no less than 35,000 men. For through the appearance of God, they were greatly cheered, right? So God showed up and fought, right? An angel come down and fought for us in that day. Now, when the battle was done, returning again with joy, they knew that Nicanor lay dead in his harness, right? So they killed Nicanor, the guy who was leading the army with this, when they killed these 35,000 men of this of Nicanor's army. Then they made a great shout and a noise, praising the Almighty in their own language, right? Hebrew. And Judas, who was ever the chief defender of the citizens, both in body and mind, and who continued his love toward his countrymen all his life, commanded to strike off Nicanor's head and his hand with his shoulder, and bring them to Jerusalem. He said, cut off his head and his whole arm. So when he was there and called them of his nation together and set the priests before the altar, he sent for them that were of the tower and showed them by on Nicanor's head and the hand of that blasphemer, which with proud brags he had stretched out against the holy temple of the Almighty, right? So he was pointing out his battle plan. He said, look, you see that temple over there? We're going to go down there and we're going to take it, right? So Judas said, all right, we killed him. Let's make an example out of his head and his arm. And when he had cut out the tongue of that ungodly Nicanor, he commanded that they should give it by pieces unto the fowls and hang up the reward of his madness before the temple. So every man praised toward the heaven the glorious Lord, saying, blessed be he that had kept his own place undefiled. He hanged also Nicanor's head upon the tower, an evident and manifest sign unto all of the help of the Lord. You see that right there? So again, we read about Purim, and the whole point of Purim is a day of deliverance, a day of salvation from the enemies who are trying to kill us, right? And that's the same thing you see of Nicanor. A day of deliverance from the enemy trying to kill us, right? This is the day of the Greeks. And you know about the history of the Greeks and the Maccabees, you know that the Greeks were a wicked and vile people towards the Israelites, right? So here's a day of deliverance represented by that. And they ordained all with a common decree, in no case to let that day pass without solemnity, but to celebrate the 13th day of the 12th month, which in the Syrian tongue is called Adar, the day before Mordecai's day, right? And that's why I said the 13th day is the day of Nicanor, and the two following, the 14th and the 15th day of the 12th month, are the days of Purim. So we have these 3 days together, right? And it just so happens to fall on a weekend this year, right? So keep that day with joyfulness and gladness from Friday to Monday, from the Sabbath of the 17th all the way until that Monday of the 20th. All right. So with that, hope y'all learned something. Keep the high holy days of the Lord, man. Reject all this foolishness out in the world that don't mean nothing but paganism and idolatry, right? Just trying to get you to commit sin, right? And follow the holy and righteous days of the Lord that are about deliverance and salvation from the enemies. All right. So with that, I say shalom. Most High in Christ bless.